Welcome to Behind the Tools. Here's Tradify CEO and your host, Michael Steckler.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Behind the Tools with me, Michael from Tradify. I'm delighted this week that we have Alison Warner. Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Nice to be here.
And for those that don't know, Alison does a few things. Alison actually, I came across Alison actually very kindly. I have a copy here actually. Wrote a book called Build and Grow. So if you haven't read this book and you're a tradesperson building your company, this is a really highly recommended read. And Alison also runs a consultancy to help trades businesses go from smaller companies into bigger companies, and also has a regular podcast. Alison, what prompted you? Your background, what was intrigued me about you is your background was working for big brands like Starbucks and in the corporate world, and then you moved into helping trades do better business. What prompted that move?
Completely by accident, if I'm honest. So yes, I was with Starbucks for about 8 years in total. I worked with them whilst they were growing massively in the UK, opening about 3 stores a week. And then the financial crisis hit. And at the time I was looking after resourcing for the UK and Ireland. And there was no need for a recruitment department. So I was made redundant. Bit of a cliche. Looking back, it probably was the best thing that could have happened to me at the time. And I had about 3 months off before getting an interim contract with a company called Pizza Express. And in that time, decided to set up my own coaching practice. And I think back then it was really, my intention was to work with big organizations still, which is what I did. I used my network and that's how I got started. And then in the November of that year, I came across an organization called BNI, which I know you have in New Zealand. It's global. Which stands for Business Network International, for those of you who haven't come across it. And I went along to my local group. I ended up joining the chapter, as they're known. And that took me into working with small businesses. And I worked with all sorts of different types of small business, from web development companies to IT to osteopaths, you name it, a real eclectic mix. But in amongst that were construction and trades. And I realized quite quickly that, well, there was nobody in the UK at the time specialising in it as an industry, but I seemed to be getting better results with those sorts of clients than I was the others. And I think there's some reasons, which I'm sure we'll come on to in the discussion, but for that. And I decided around 2016 to write the book and to specialise in it. So they kind of found me. People ask me this all the time, what made you choose trades as well? I didn't really. They chose me, and I really enjoyed working with them, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a few guests actually. It's interesting you mentioned sort of the networking groups. They seem to be pretty popular amongst the trades who use them then to often find their first accountant. I had one actually in New Zealand who bought his van from a car dealer that was part of the network. And do you think that's something, would you recommend that to tradespeople, that if they're looking to
absolutely
get broader exposure from setting up a business, join a local network like that?
Very much so. In fact, I was having a discussion with somebody who's just joined the academy earlier today, and he's in the early stages of setting up his plumbing and heating business. And he's saying, "Oh, what should I do?" It's kind of, there's so many options, aren't there? And I said, "Look, if it was me, I'd be investing in a pretty decent website, and I would be looking at getting into a BNI chapter, because." If you get into the right one and you really make it work for you, it's gold dust. It really is.
Yeah. And you talk about, as I'm going to touch on something you talked about there. You talk about someone setting up a business, and you talk about having a website as a primary vehicle. One of the challenges I've seen from a marketing your trades business across the world actually is that many tradespeople, this seems to be exacerbated in the last year, have more work than they can cope with from kind of word of mouth. Yes. Is that something you tend to see, or do you often see new people that are either have been an apprentice, have been a sort of subcontractor, or work for someone else, then set their own business up? Is that a big challenge in terms of how they think about growth and how they think about getting their first customer?
I think we tend to get involved later, further down the path. So they've already established, they've already got a certain amount of customers, but it's Some are, in complete overwhelm. Certainly when I started working with trades, I think that was kind of what I typically saw. Now I probably see slightly bigger businesses which have achieved as much as they can without getting outside assistance, and so they're wanting help to get to that next step. But absolutely, recruitment at the moment in the UK is a real challenge, and I think it's almost a perfect storm. We've gone through Brexit, and a lot of skilled tradespeople have returned back to their home country, coupled with a huge increase in demand for home improvements, and the two hitting at the same time are making it particularly challenging to recruit.
Yeah, and I'd like to sort of dig into that a bit more, because I know you, in your book and on your podcast, you have a whole chapter on hiring and how to think about hiring. Is that often the when you talked about going into those companies when they're slightly at that point where they're somewhat overwhelmed, what are you usually helping them with, or is it a number of things? What's usually the biggest thing that makes them call for outside help?
It's a number of things. I think the commonality is often extreme stress and frustration. And it can be one of two challenges, or actually both. So it tends to be around the people. So that could be either I can't find people, or I'm frustrated with people not doing things to my standard, or it's probably three things actually. The numbers, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. So a big one is, why have I not got more money? I'm working really, really hard and I don't seem to have anything to show for it. It comes in, it goes straight out. And then the third one, which they're perhaps not aware of, some people do talk about it, are systems and processes. They say they want structure, they want organization. So I suppose it's those three, thinking of it now, talking it through. Yeah.
And on the systems and processes, how much of that is, to a degree, there's technology that can help solve some of those problems, without speaking, about what we do, but other companies or accountancy packages or whatever that might be. How much is that just purely education? I mean, you have a really good structure to how to think about that in the book. How much of it is sort of structure, and how much of that is education around software and how to use it?
That's a really good question. I think it is definitely a bit of both. I think there's something psychological that needs to change in going from being on the tools, being really busy doing the work, to then coming off the tools and actually running a business. So I always give clients the example of when I went from, like, most of my career was operational. So I was an area manager for most of it. And I remember clearly the first week I went into a support center function where I was looking after resourcing. And, as an area manager, your diary is pretty well predetermined for you. So week 1 of every month, you have your regional meeting. Week 2, you have your meeting with your managers, and then week 3 and 4, you'll have one-to-ones and you'll do your audits or whatever it might be. It's kind of laid out for you. And yes, it's down to you to organize yourself, but in terms of what you should be doing on a daily basis, it's kind of quite prescriptive. And then suddenly I was in this role it required me to think far more strategically around, what were my long-term objectives, what should I be doing on a daily basis to achieve those. It was a completely different way of thinking, and I often give that as an example, because in order to be successful and run the business, you need to take that step back and think in a different way and plan your diary in a different way. Otherwise you just run around firefighting, just reacting to everything that falls on your plate for that day. So there's definitely a psychological change that needs to take place. Mindset change, probably a better way of putting it. In terms of software and learning the numbers, I think you referred to that there. It's about, using the support that's out there. You should never be trying to do it all of yourself. I know with Tradify, you have a fantastic immersion and training for them. It's about reaching out and getting that help, not trying to do everything yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme that we see. I think particularly if you've moved from using either a spreadsheet or pen and paper, as is often the case, and so there is a need for education. And then back to the hiring topic. This is what I'm quite passionate about. I think there's an element of education around how to identify the right employee, cultural fit. We had a guest, Ryan England in the US, who has a whole business around how to really help and recruit across the trades and do that in the right way. And he talks about, he gave an example of, how he interviews and how he sort of asks his trades to interview. And one of the sort of funny comments he made was, if they turn up, he had a company where if they turned up, that was 2 points. It was just crazy, if they turned up for the interview, then that was 2 points. If they got 5 points, they kind of got the job. And cultural fit is really important. What do you see the most common mistakes are with companies you work with in terms of how they approach hiring?
I think the most common one is not planning it. So, and you see that in other industries as well. It's panic hiring. It's waiting too long and then thinking, oh my God, I'm desperate for somebody. And they hear of somebody that's recommended, their next door neighbour's son's, whatever happens to be available, and they give them a go, and that cycle. And it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So maybe they're not aware of how to run a campaign and the job boards and where to advertise and how to put a job advert together. It's all of that sort of stuff. And actually, that's what I talk about in the book is casting the net wide to make sure that you've got plenty of people to choose from, having a selection process. That's what you would do in any big company. And it still works to a degree, but I think we're seeing, we're certainly working on different ways to approach it in the last 2-3 months, because it's not working as well. Right. And I think in order, there's lots of different ways to solve the problem, I think, but in terms of what business owners should be thinking about is really taking that step back and thinking, what is different about my company? Why do people work for me? Why do people stay with me? Go and ask them, what is it that you enjoy about working here? And it might be something different to what you think it is. A big one we hear is, will you pay me on time? And again, you think, well, surely that's basic, but no, it's not always commonplace. So if you pay people on time, you treat them with respect, you involve them in decision making, you have regular socials, all of those sorts of things, people appreciate, and they are different. And so you need to call that out. You need to tell people what's different about your company in the same way that you would for your potential client to attract customers. Think of your team members being internal customers, and think about what would attract people to come and want to work for you, because the risk of just doing a job advert and putting it onto the job boards is that there's probably only 10% of the population, the trade population that is, looking for a job at any given time. And so if you're only relying on that, then that's a risk, because some of those 10% maybe aren't the right fit for your company. You almost want a way to tap into people who are happy where they are and aren't looking, or maybe aren't so happy where they are, feel that they aren't being treated as well as they would like, but they're not so unhappy that they're actually going out and actively looking. There's a guy up in the north, in the UK, a guy called Lee Brown, whose Instagram handle is The Peaky Plumber. And he's sort of done it by accident. I think he's really built a reputation for himself in the area as being a great employer, and he has people queuing up to work for him. So I think that's part of the answer in terms of what business owners can be thinking about. I think outside of that, as a country, and I was just talking about this with somebody this morning, I think we need to do something quite quickly, I think, to solve the problem, because there is a real shortage, which with that comes a great opportunity.
Well, that's my point of view on this. I think it probably starts with education. Like, how do you encourage more people into trades as a viable kind of education path and viable career choice? Because you can do, as working with these businesses, you can build a very lucrative kind of career from building a decent trades business. What do you think needs to happen there? It feels like, to me, there isn't enough of a kind of concerted industry sort of push to encourage that. It feels like there needs to be a marketing campaign to some degree, and I've sort of talked about this with other people.
And I think it needs to start at the school level. So I think it's how we view the trade industry. Certainly in the UK, there is a problem, I think, in that it's not it's almost like what you go and do if you didn't do that well at school. If you weren't academic, it's like, well, that's what you go and do. It's seen as the second choice, when, as you rightly just said there, it's crazy, because you can have a very lucrative career and business, both rewarding financially as well as in other ways. So it's madness, and I know it's certainly seen differently in Australia from what I understand, and the US. Don't know about New Zealand, but it is respected in a different way. So I think it needs to start right at the beginning at school level. I think on top of that, I think we need to invest in apprenticeships, and really, from probably a government angle, focus on them and take them more seriously.
Yeah, because the apprenticeships, that's your pipeline for future employees. You talk about the job boards and the lack of people, and that's the challenge. I think the other challenge is that for many smaller businesses, hiring an apprentice is not really about the money; it's more about the drain on having to then train someone, and they're not necessarily as productive as someone who knows what they're doing. But once you get those people through, 1 or 2 years' time, you have a very productive employee. So I think that's where it probably needs to start, for sure. Definitely agree with that. And are there other common problems that you come across with people as they start to scale, aside from sort of the process business side and then hiring? What's the other sort of common mistakes you tend to see that you help fix?
I think probably about building a team, in terms of how you communicate with a team and how you involve the team in solving the problems of the business. So I think, again, this is not just unique to the construction and trade industries, but often when people become managers for the first time,
right,
they think that because they're a manager, it's up to them to solve everything, and they take this huge weight on their shoulders around, well, there's a problem to fix in the business, therefore I must fix it, I must make the decision. I was just talking about this with a client yesterday, and they've got some challenges and they can't make a decision on something. And I said, guys, stop trying to fix everything. Just put it over to the team. Get the team to vote. Just get the team to agree. Look, for the sake of the team, whatever decision is made here, we will go with. Because otherwise you'll always drive a them and us culture. It will always be, oh, well, the management this, the management that. So there's a huge psychology, as we know, around leading people. And I was fortunate enough to be given quite a lot of responsibility from a young age and work for companies that really invested in teaching you these skills. So, it's no wonder that when people find themselves in these positions, there's some stumbling blocks, but there is help out there. I think that's one. I think the financial side is another. Often, again, it's probably the lack of training in how to budget and how to read a profit and loss account. And there's a fear that goes with that. So because they haven't been trained in it, because the accountant speaks in a different language and they don't want to say that they don't understand, and this is, again, not just construction and trades, there's a fear that goes along with it. And the tax bill at the end of the year is always a surprise, and that prevents them from making decisions around investment, because they don't really know what the cash flow looks like in the coming months, and so that prevents the growth of the business.
Which I think comes
so
back to
I'd say those two things.
Yeah, because that seems to affect the hiring as well. If you haven't got a handle on cash flow, then you might make decisions not to hire because you think, oh, we can't afford to hire, or the converse, you hire and you actually can't afford to hire. So I think it is a really important thing to, to get a handle on, and your book goes into detail on that. And then the sort of the podcast that you launched, what was your intent behind that? You've got some great guests on there. It looks like it's very representative of the sort of trades industry in the UK. What was the intent behind doing that, and what prompted you to do that?
It actually came as a result of working with a guy called Daniel Priestley, who's Australian but lives in the UK. He's written quite a few books. My favourite one is Key Person of Influence. So I did the Key Person of Influence program, which is what led me to write the book. And Daniel's a real advocate of what he calls digital assets. So the short answer to your question is, I was really wanting to get our profile and out there a lot more, and to drive awareness. And I knew that one of the ways to do that would be to develop digital assets, one of which is the podcast show, and things like the book, and yeah, it works. It really does work, because people can. I don't know if you're familiar with 0 moments of truth, the research that Google did, and just for anyone that isn't aware of that, it's because this applies to trades as well. It's really about how we make buying decisions now in this digital age, and we will go and research, and so it's how much content is out there that we can gorge on and absorb, which will help us essentially build our trust in that brand. So that was really the main reason.
It's a really good point, because I often speak to trades that talk about word of mouth and too much work, but actually they all tend to agree that one of the big kind of consumer buying decisions is actually to see the work that's been done, see the professionalism of the company. And actually that often starts with whether it's a website, their social media presence, and even the people that we've had on the show who are in this space, and they wouldn't all want to use the term influencer, but people that have, thousands of followers who are in the trades. That wasn't their intent behind doing that and really getting those followers, but actually it is actually quite a good reinforcement of their brand, because other consumers who are looking for someone, they see that stuff and they're like, oh great, this person's credible, they get to see them at work, it's very authentic, and if they like the personality, I think it really helps. That whole digital assets, whether it's just a website, social presence, but having kind of really a portfolio of work online, I think is really, really powerful. I always give probably a bad analogy, but the analogy of sort of hotels, which or Airbnb or whatever it is, right? Those hotels and those people within Airbnb that just don't do good photography, which nowadays is sort of inexcusable. It's quite easy with any form of mobile device. And you probably won't book them because you take one look at a few of the pictures and think, oh, this doesn't look very nice. And they're often doing themselves a disservice. And I feel the same way about trades. They do lots of great work. It's worth taking pictures off, and then obviously sharing that across those platforms. And is that a common thing that you also help with in terms of growth? I guess as you're working with those bigger companies that are scaling up, is that a big part of what you do in terms of their sort of those digital assets?
We do. I do touch on 0 moments of truth with them. Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't consider myself a social media expert at all, but I think, in fact, we cover it in the academy as well. It's just about, often what I find with these things, which is really great, often I find trades are very, very creative. So all you need to do is just share a book or an article or a piece of research, and then they will come up with the ideas and they'll go, oh, really? That's really interesting. Well, I could do this and I could do that. And I think it's about planting a seed to allow people to think differently, and they really enjoy it. They engage in it, and find the things that they would most like to implement in their business.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that might drive the increase in apprentices or school kids, choosing this as a career, actually is some of those people that are very active across social. And it's quite a worldwide phenomenon. There's a lot of high profile tradespeople, trades companies that initially I think started out just sharing themselves at work. Some of it was funny stuff, some of it was serious, and then they got these kind of big followings. And they're actually doing some great things for the industry. I think that's probably where you might inspire. Certainly I had Rachel from Plumbing by Rach, who's got quite a following. There's Amy Barrett Singh as well, who has a pretty significant following. They talk about women in the trades and the lack of and how that's changing. And I actually think sometimes kids coming through school who maybe, because of the way the education system's set up, aren't looking at that, will look at those types of people and say, oh, actually, it looks like they're having fun. They enjoy their work. They're making a decent living. I think that's quite a powerful vehicle to get that growth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A really good point. Maybe that's part of the solution as well. Absolutely, because kids do look to influencers, don't they?
Yes, yeah.
So
well, you get to see it, and you get to see the reality of what the job really involves, the good and the bad. And I think I spoke to an Australian trades company a couple of weeks ago, and his whole ethos for setting the business up, and he came from a very different background, was he wanted a 4-day week. He hasn't got it yet, but that was the ambition, and he hasn't got it because the business has grown and he's inundated with work. So it's a good problem, but that was his intent for setting so I don't think it's always about money. What's also interesting about some of these trades companies is the intent isn't money, it's a lifestyle thing as well. It's like if I can get to a 4-day week and come off the tools slightly, and that was his intention. So I think that's another interesting thing, that if I'm a school leaver looking to do different things, that might be my ambition versus purely about money. Obviously helps, but actually things like having that lifestyle and operate on your own terms. And then you sort of kicked into this maybe sort of 6 or 7 years ago, working specifically with trades. Have you seen any significant changes in that period with the industry?
I think personally, I've seen a difference in maybe the types of businesses we're attracting. Now, I don't know if that is reflective of a change in the industry, but I think going back 7 years ago, maybe there were smaller businesses that were perhaps more in overwhelm, and nowadays we seem to be attracting a slightly larger business that has some of that organization already in place. So maybe they've already got a system, for example, a CRM system or job management. They maybe have some help in the office. They've got maybe 3 or 4 people working for them, and they've achieved a certain amount, but they're struggling to get to that next stage of growth. So attracting more of them, whether that's because our brand is more well known now than it was 7 years ago, possibly that could be the reason. Or is it because maybe getting coaching, investing in your own development is maybe seen more favorably? I mean, I remember when I started out, almost 12 years ago, I had people sign up with me and say, can you not tell anybody that I'm working with you? It was seen as a kind of, I'm admitting that I've got a weakness. And now I think that has definitely changed in the industry. It's seen as, no, I'm quite proud to have a coach. It shows I'm serious about my business and I'm serious about investing in me. And that's definitely changed.
I've seen that shift. I've had 2 guests on here, actually, both who talk about joining a network and actually also intentionally going and finding a coach and trying to understand the payback. But, one of them said it was the best thing that he ever did. And then it was interesting because I asked him, well, why? What's it done to the business in the last 6 months? And he said, I don't know yet. But it just feels like he's getting something from that experience of having a sort of third person that has experience in another area that can help him in that direction. So it seems like there's that's one of the best pieces of advice from trades that have been around for a while, has been find someone else, even if it's just another trades company, actually, in many instances, that can be a mentor, can help you through the things that they learned and the experience they had. So I think there's definitely been a shift. And one of the other things I'm intrigued by, and I ask a lot of plumbing companies with the sort of change in boiler regulation, which doesn't have a short-term impact, probably won't even have a medium-term impact if you're doing boiler servicing or those types of things. But do you see a lot of companies you work with starting to think sort of more about the sort of green future and what that means as either an opportunity or a threat or both?
Opportunity, yes, very much. Not everybody, but we've just, for example, taken on a construction business in London, and he is the business owner. He's passionate about the green agenda, so he's not just doing it because he's switched on and he can see, right, I better get my ducks in a row because this is coming whether I like it or not. He is absolutely, it's in his DNA, but it's not yet communicated in his brand. So that's what he's got to work on, his messaging, and to get that message out there. But very much so. I think, it definitely in the plumbing industry, a lot of plumbing and heating engineers are talking about that, and they're aware of it. So without a doubt, and I think it's, well, as I say, it's on its way. So that is the future, and it'll be here before we know it. So
yes,
it's a way to stand out from your competition, isn't it?
I think I've seen, I agree.
You can show that you're leading the way, and you're switched on. Excuse the pun. And you're not only aware of it, but you're making modifications in your business to cater for that market.
I've seen two types of business. There's those that actually just lean very heavily towards it and then actually just specialize, whether it be Tesla charging points would be a good example, where people have seen that EV is going to be a really big thing. So electricians said, right, I'm just going to actually double down and be the EV person for this area. And there's lots of great examples of that. Others who have taken more of the pragmatic approach of, I need to educate myself about this. It may not be a big part of the business today, but it may well be in the future, whether that be solar power or other areas, or hydrogen in the case of. My sense of these things is some of them will take longer than we often predict, but others will probably come around a bit quicker. Like I think if you look at the EV market, it's probably, much as there's been a lot of noise around it, it probably is still a lot bigger at this stage in time than we would have anticipated. And I think that only accelerates. So it's quite an interesting area. And then could you talk about do you have any good examples of real success stories where you work with someone who's maybe a much smaller company, now they're much bigger? And what tends to be the ambition with the companies that you work with?
I would say that pretty much everybody that comes to us wants to grow. Definitely, though, we seem to attract people generally late 20s to early 40s, who, not exclusively, but definitely the majority of our clients are in that age bracket, and they're ambitious, they're driven, they do a good job, and they're switched on enough to know, right, I want to do this properly. I don't want to do it the painful route. I want to get from A to B and learn the pitfalls. So that tends to be. But remind me of your question, Michael.
I think my question was any examples of. I guess that was a question. It's about ambition. It was like how big they can get. Do you have people that want to be nationwide? Those types of questions.
Yes, from time to time. I mean, probably the client that's coming to mind I've worked with for about 5 years, and this is probably one of my proudest clients I'm proudest of working with. And he has a local garage, and actually his ambition wasn't necessarily to grow. He was in a really bad place, and really struggling financially, and it was kind of, I think I was last chance saloon, really. Right. And effectively he just wasn't charging enough, and he didn't value himself or the business enough. So we kind of had to work on that to begin with. I mean, I quite quickly said, well, this is what needs to happen, and it will be whether or not you can follow through and do this. If you can get these things done, which was things like charging for customers' cars to be collected and delivered back, actually getting customers to pay, not just turn up and take their car away and say, I'll pay you later. So it was those sorts of things. I said, if you can get through that, then you'll be, the rest of it will be plain sailing. And bless him, he did, and it must have been quite challenging for him to do, but he did that, and we got the business profitable and started to iron out some other issues. And I'd been working with him probably for about 2 years, and I remember saying to him, what would you like? What would you like to aim for next? And he said, well, I've always wanted a boat. And this is somebody who struggled to pay his own staff at Christmas prior. And he lives on his own, and you'd have a pretty miserable Christmas each year. And so that's where he'd come from. And he says, look, I've always wanted a boat. I said, right, okay, how much would a boat cost? So I said, right, let's put that as the goal. And then
what sort of boat was it?
It was a nice
boat. It's a big boat.
Yeah,
it's a nice boat.
Yeah, nice little speedboat. Yeah. He's got it moored down in pool. I'm kind of spoiling it. But he turned up. I don't know how long it was later. It was a few months later, probably maybe a year later. He's very understated, this guy. And he says, oh, I've got the boat. I said, what? It's amazing, and showed me the photo of it. And that's, I think, one of my proudest client. I don't want to use the word achievements, but clients I've worked with, I'm proudest of.
So it's a great turnaround. Yeah, it's a great story, and it illustrates for me one of the things that is having that goal. I think for some of these trades companies, which is in his example was a boat, but having that thing that says whether it's a 4-day week, a boat, some other financial metric or otherwise, is quite a powerful vehicle to motivate companies for sure. Great.
Yeah, well, it has to start with the vision and understanding why you're doing what you're doing. It has to be a bit more than the money. That has to be your driving force.
Yeah, 100%. Great. Now, I always finish this asking a series of questions, and obviously I'm usually talking to trades companies, so I'd be interested in your answers. The first one is, if you weren't doing what you're doing, what trade, and I use the word trade, but what would you be doing otherwise?
you wouldn't want me doing a trade, believe me. I'm one of the most unpractical people that you could ever meet. I think if I was to run a trade business, I wouldn't be on the tools, but I would probably maybe go with plumbing and heating.
Okay.
For some of the reasons that we've just discussed, there's clearly a lot of changes happening, and I think it's probably quite an exciting wave to ride and get involved with early on. I can see that changing. I think building would probably scare me a bit because it's there's a lot more risk, I think, in building longer period of time to deliver the projects and cash flow and all of that. I think I would probably, but I would not be fitting the boiler, believe me.
You wouldn't fit the boiler,
or the underfloor fitting, or the heat pump, or whatever.
If you ever turn up to fit a boiler, we'll bear that in mind. The other question was, what would be your go-to? I use the phrase on-site, and I guess you are on-site when you're meeting with people that you're helping. On-site lunch. We get quite varied answers here, so I'm always intrigued as to what people say. If
what would
if you have a choice. On-site lunch. So when you're working, what's your go-to lunch?
So what's my favourite food in a different way of asking?
Yeah. Well, not really, because favourite food at lunchtime, yes. There's another way of asking it.
I see. I try and be quite healthy. So probably noodles, Asian, that type of food. Sushi. I love sushi. Yeah.
Sushi.
Yeah. I try to avoid bread, especially at lunchtime. I sleep in the afternoon then.
Yeah. Cool. And then you said you're not going to be on the tools, but if you did have a tool brand, if you ever do go to the toolbox, which tool is your sort of go-to tool that you would use? If there is one.
You're asking the wrong.
You never go to the toolbox. Okay.
I think I could probably use a screwdriver.
There we go.
Just about.
That'll do.
Give me a set of accounts any day, I'll be fine.
Calculator.
There you go.
Calculator. There you go. Yeah. Do you have a go-to calculator, just out of interest? Is there a brand you would use?
My
iPhone now. Yeah, that's the trouble. I do think about things like that. It's funny how people say those big, expensive calculators. There's absolutely no need now. And then kind of one of the last couple of questions is, is there a music or sports event you would go to? I mean, things are opening up. Hopefully, we see that continue, and hopefully we see, this thing eventually pass. But if that does happen, what would be the event that you would love to go to, sports or music?
I'm going next week, actually. This is probably going to completely destroy any credibility that I've built up over the last half hour. But growing up, I grew up in the 80s, and I was a massive culture club fan. And I'm going to see Culture Club next week, for my birthday.
Culture Club of Reformed, really? I didn't even know that.
They've always been together. Well, on and
hold
off.
On, is it everyone? Everyone's in the band.
Funny you should say that. No, there's one that I think John Moss is not going to be there because I think he's fallen out with them, from what I hear. To be careful what I say, because this is going out public. I don't think he's. I don't think he's going to be there. But no, the other three, Boy George is frontlining. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
There's a few other 80s that are.
Where are they playing?
They're doing various venues around the southeast in the UK at the moment. They're all sort of stately home places. So this one is in Saffron Walden in Essex. Yeah. So looking forward to that. Hopefully the weather will be nice.
Yes. Yeah. Well, fingers crossed it should be.
Fingers crossed.
Great. And then the sort of last question is, this has been a really great conversation, and we always like recommendations from people of other guests that we should get on. Is there anyone that you come across, you've spoken with, that you think would be a great guest, or someone with an interesting perspective on the trades that we should talk to?
Yeah, one of the companies that we're working quite closely with at the moment, have been for about the last 6 months, is a company called Lead Hero. The founder's named Francis Rodino and Carolina, and they're doing some really interesting things in the marketing space, specifically for trades. They're working exclusively with plumbing and heating engineers at the moment, but Francis has got an impressive background with global companies in marketing positions. So the marketing is something that we kind of touch on, but as I say, it's more what we specialize in, really, is about helping businesses get the structures in place to make the most of the leads and inquiries. So they're a good partnership for us. So yeah, I'm sure Francis would be a great guest on this.
Cool, great. And then where can I've shown everyone the book. I think is it for anyone that's listening. Actually, if you listen to the podcast, if you're not going to read the book, on your podcast, there's a very good couple of episodes that summarize the sort of build approach, which I would recommend. Where can people find you in terms of your podcast and website and that type of stuff?
So the website is www.evolveandgrow, that's A&D, coaching.com, evolveandgrowcoaching.com. The podcast show is on there. There's a link through to Amazon where they can buy the book as well, Build and Grow. I believe it is available in New Zealand, I think. And yeah, after that, then we're on all of the usual social media. We have a trades and builders business growth group on Facebook. We're on Instagram, which the handle is actually my name on that, Alison Warner Coach, on LinkedIn. So yeah, all of those places.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you speaking. This has been really helpful. I think you've touched on lots of the things that we see kind of our customers and people we come across wrestling with in the trades. And I do think just that structure, and I think the reason why the book's so good is it's very practical. It's funny you said you weren't practical. It's a very practical book. I mean, it walks through step by step, I think, in terms that someone maybe who hasn't run a P&L and done those things would definitely appreciate and understand. And I think that's and gives good advice and case studies. So I definitely recommend that as a great read if you're thinking about building and expanding your trades business. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for listening, watching, and as always, if you enjoyed the show or have feedback, let us know and rate, review on your chosen platforms. Until next time, cheers.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Behind the Tools is brought to you by Tradify, job management software for your trade business. If you enjoyed the podcast, let us know by leaving a review, and be sure to tell your mates about it. Email behindthetools@tradifyhq.com if you or someone you know would be keen to join the show as a guest.